In 1919, fresh from serving in the Royal Artillery, 26-year-old Harold Benet bought himself a boat to help him in his work as a local shipping agent, passing on ship arrivals and departures and handling insurance claims on behalf of Lloyd's of London. The boat, which was fitted with a modern oil-powered engine, was considered to be one of the fastest boats on the island. He called her Diana.
When my parents were first married, they lived in St Albans on the bulwarks at Rose Cottage, and I think the Diana was probably moored in the harbour at St Albans. So wonderful, just on the doorstep for him, and he was always very keen on it. And they got married, I think it was 20 or 21, and they went to St Malo on their honeymoon in November, because they were married on November the 11th, which is actually my birthday as well. And they went to St Malo on the boat, which I think was probably pretty rough and pretty grim for my mother, but she was game. So we always used to have picnics, usually on a Sunday in the Diana, usually from St Albans going out to the fort. And if the tide was up, you'd sail out there and perhaps walk back, or I think we did stay there once or twice overnight. And then, of course, there was always the regattas, Gorey Regatta, and I think the Diana was taken around there. And I think we went to Jersey from Gorey once or twice.
Diana was given an overhaul in 1927, when the stern was modernised into a more stylish V-shape and a new Parsons 4-stroke engine was fitted. She could now reach speeds of up to 8.5 knots. Even after the historic evacuation of Dunkirk in May 1940, there were still over 200,000 Allied troops in Western France. Just before the French surrender, it was decided to bring them back to Britain. The evacuation was named Operation Ariel. Altogether, 191,870 British and Allied troops were evacuated, largely through the ports of Cherbourg, St Malo, Brest, Saint-Nazaire and La Rochelle. Jersey, situated in the Bay of St Malo, a mere 19 miles from the French coast, was well placed to assist with this operation.
Evacuation of St Malo came about after Dunkirk, and the Admiralty at the time of Dunkirk realised the value of having small craft which were able to go inshore onto the beaches. And when the troops had retreated as far as St Malo and they needed more craft, the Admiralty then put in a request to Jersey for small craft if they could go down to St Malo to help, if required, with the evacuation.
First trip was at 4 a.m. on Monday, June the 17th. We arrived at St Malo 7:20 a.m. and reported to the Naval Control, who then ordered us to return to St Helier with 10 RAF personnel who were trapped there, and we arrived home with them at 10 p.m. Strictly ordered to return to St Malo by 2 p.m. on Tuesday the 18th. As we were approaching, a large fire was raging ashore. The last 2 miles from the breakwater, we passed the 17th St Helier Yacht Club volunteer evacuation boats.
If I remember rightly from the story that Grandpa used to tell me, was that as they left St Malo, they could hear the detonations going off behind them. So it really was, as soon as they'd gone off the port, it was a case of bombs away, and the docks were blown, and anything that was of value to the invading Germans was blown as well.
Thankfully, there were the 20 boats from St Helier Yacht Club and other people down there. They boarded those craft together with the demolition party, other people who were there, Paymaster General with all the money from the army, and the British consul came back as well. They had a terrible passage back in force 4 to 5 winds. A couple of them broke down and had to be towed, but amazingly, even in those conditions, they all came back.
Although the Diana had been involved in a few rescue and salvage missions around the coast of the Channel Islands in her early history, The onset of the German occupation of France and the subsequent Allied evacuation provided the opportunity for the boat and its crew to truly prove their valour. The 20 boats from Jersey succeeded in evacuating 21,474 military personnel. As this was a covert operation orchestrated by the Admiralty, those who assisted in the evacuation efforts were unable to tell the story of their bravery to their friends and loved ones.
No idea what was happening. I asked him, the last time I spoke to him actually, it was just after a whist drive, because he used to MC all the whist drives. And I asked him where he was going and when, and he couldn't tell me. Naturally, he was bound to secrecy. He couldn't tell anybody. But I didn't know that. I just thought he was being a bit evasive. But anyway, so I didn't know when he was going or where he went.
I remember the evacuation. I certainly remember when they went to St. Malo, you know, and we could see the smoke coming up on the horizon over St. Malo, and that was when I think my mother decided we would have to leave.
Unfortunately, little did the islanders know that they would themselves be subjected to German occupation just a few weeks later. A short while passed with the boat's crew and fellow sailors receiving little recognition for their bravery during the evacuation, in part due to the strictly imposed media blackout enforced during the occupation. Other islanders, such as Clarence Glendower, were called up immediately after the evacuation of St. Malo and left the island to serve in Her Majesty's Armed Forces. Clarence was stationed in Arbroath on patrol to rescue RAF pilots who were downed in the North Sea.
And then when they got back to Jersey, they were sent immediately off to Portsmouth. I think he hardly had time. He probably had time to go and say goodbye to his mother and sister, and that was all. He's too romantic, he's so silly. We wrote to one another occasionally with Red Cross letters, but you know they took 6 months to get to the recipient and 6 months to reply to get to you. So that was half a year before you had your answer. And that was that. And then when we were liberated, he did write to me, and I answered. And strangely enough, it was very odd really, but he felt the same way about me as I felt about him. Without any words spoken, we just knew. And so when he came back in July on the mailboat. He told me where to wait for him on the pier, and he got off the boat, and he came towards me, and I went towards him, and we just put our arms around each other and had our first kiss. It was very stupid, but to say that, you know, it's just true.
Following the liberation of the island, had it not been for a chance encounter, their heroic acts could have been consigned to history.
When the royal visit of Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh came about in June 1949, the Duke had requested to see those people who had gone down. So there was a gathering down here on South Pier where he thanked all the people for what they had done at St. Malo. There the matter then was left. The club applied for some recognition to the Admiralty, but nothing was forthcoming. And it was sometime later that Pat Grishy, club member, was in Carteret with his boat, Burgee flying, and there was a voice from the quay said, "Has your club received any recognition for their operations at St. Malo?" And that person was no other than Howard Johnson, who was led to the demolition party at St. Malo. When Pat told him that we had not, he said, "Apply again and I'll make sure that the deeds were known about." Because at the time he was captain of HMS Vernon, which was the underwater establishment at Portsmouth, and he had had a superb career during the war. So the club applied again, and they were lucky, and the Admiralty took in their plea or request, and they granted St. Helier Yacht Club the defaced ensign of the St. Helier crossed axes on an Admiralty patent anchor, which the Admiralty very rarely allowed to be used. And the Diana was one of the craft which went down there and came back. The awarding by the Admiralty of a defaced red ensign is something unique. Only 2 other yacht clubs, as far as I know, have a defaced red ensign, and there are very few of those around the world. I believe Malta is the only other one, and there are lots of defaced blue ensigns, but red ensigns are few and far between.
I went to the yacht club this year, 2016, just to understand a little bit more about it. So it's quite interesting about obviously the ensign that was awarded eventually to the club for their work in the evacuation, and the book that's obviously been written recently, which was quite interesting. That was a picture of my grandfather in it, which is always good to see. It was only maybe 10-15 years ago, through my grandfather and other people that were involved at the time telling their story, that it then became apparent that obviously there was more than just the yacht club involved, and it became more collaborated between the sort of the organisations and the yacht club, and it was good. So everyone's recognised for the invaluable work they did at the time.
I just hope that when people hoist their red ensigns, they think of the club and they think of all the people, not just yacht club members, who went down in terrible conditions to help the British Admiralty at the time. And at the end, we got some award for those deeds.
The defaced red ensign is indeed still proudly displayed on many boats of the members of St Helier Yacht Club, including the Diana, which on the 24th of June 2000, Chris Lemageret, Steve Luce and John Hayes sailed to St Malo as part of the 60th anniversary flotilla to mark the events of 1940. In November 2014, after almost a century of active sailing, the Diana was taken out of the water for the last time. Finally, in 2016, it was decided that she would become the centerpiece of an exhibition representing the small boating community of the island.